Welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 6, Recovery from Parental Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. Our goal is to provide information and resources to educate and empower viewers to recover from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse so they can reclaim their health, happiness, and personal power. Our speakers specialize in supporting others through their unique expertise and offer valuable insights, tools, and inspiration for viewers to find the courage and motivation to change their lives. I'm honored to be here today with Ginger Gentile, a champion for alienated families. From documentary filmmaker to healing coach, Ginger Gentile is a documentary filmmaker who turned her own childhood trauma and a powerful film, Erasing Family, into a mission to help families. The film exposes the hidden pain children experience when a loving parent is pushed out of their lives due to parental alienation, a problem affecting 22 million in the US alone. Fueled by the film's message and her trauma she suffered as a child of a high-conflict divorce, she founded Reversing Parental Alienation. This program, led by a team of coaches who themselves experienced alienation, offers parents the tools they need to reconnect with their children and rebuild fractured family bonds. Her unique approach has proven successful, even in difficult cases, bringing hope to families struggling with parental alienation. Ginger is an IPEC trained coach certified by the International Coaches Federation and trained under Bill Eddy, the leader in conflict resolution, becoming the first outside coach to work with his High Conflict Institute. In her time serving as the executive director of the National Parents Organization, she added 6 new state affiliates and garnered national press attention for the Shared Parenting Report Card. For her work in reuniting families, Ginger Gentile was named an Architect of Change by Maria Shriver and has spoken at SXSW and appeared on numerous podcasts and TV shows, including Red Table Talk.
It was such like a tug of war with whose side are you going to choose. I realized like it was just tearing me apart.
It was always, you're on my side or you're dead to me.
The first time my dad saw me, I was in my grandma's arms in a courtroom.
It really felt like she didn't want anything to do with me.
It's hard when you have to stop and think that your child wants nothing to do with you because of what they've been taught.
One parent gets to be a parent and the other gets to be, at best, a visitor, and at worst, completely erased. And a lot of it has to do with our judicial system.
What I remember about being in court was having to lie to the judge. Sorry.
It destroys lives, it bankrupts people every day, it tears children from their homes, and just so happens to be a $50 billion a year industry.
If you don't pay your child support, you're gonna go to jail.
Walter Scott decided to bolt from his car. Court documents show he owed more than $18,000 in child support payments.
These fathers are not deadbeat, they're dead broke.
Nothing I said mattered. None of the evidence I brought forward mattered. The judge wouldn't even look at it.
He's nothing like I was told he was.
If there's 22 million adults dealing with this, that's over 22 million children. And the mental health consequences are severe and long-lasting.
It's heartbreaking to me to see how many of you are dealing with this.
My dad was erased from my life.
It's happening all over the world.
This isn't a father's rights issue. It's not a mother's rights issue. It's a human right issue.
My daughter here and I have been alienated from each other for the majority of her life. She called me and said, "Dad, it's time to move home," and she came home.
If the court worked in a way where there was 50-50 custody, I'd be happier. I wouldn't feel a void because I've never known a life where one parent wasn't missing.
A new bill would make default custody 50-50.
How come we don't have shared parenting in the law? It's called special interests.
We need more clarity in law to support what is best for children, shared parenting, and this helps move in that direction.
I want to show people that it can have a happy ending.
In about 10 minutes, we're going to leave for the courthouse so I can legally readopt my daughter.
Welcome, Ginger. I'm so excited you're here with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Pi. I'm so happy to be here and talk to all the brave souls in your audience who are ready to let go of possibly generations of family trauma. So this is a great day.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So tell us about your film, Erasing Family, and how it made you decide to help families reunite.
Sure. So I decided to make Erasing Family because I'm a child of high conflict divorce, and it actually isn't my first film on this topic. Like a lot of children escaping their high conflict families, alienating patterns, and this is often isn't talked about because we often talk about how children are enmeshed with one parent. I think a lot of kids, and I'm in this category, said, I need to get away from both of my parents and my entire family. So I moved to Argentina, a country that I had no connection to, and Spanish was my worst subject in school. So when I was 21, I moved as far away as I could get because Argentina is on the other side of the globe. And I spent 13 years there. And about halfway through my time there, oh yeah, I go big or I go home. So this is really like, I was like, looking back, that was the reason, of course, I didn't admit that was the reason, but it was really to get away from my family. Mm-hmm. And when I was there, I met a man who the first thing he tells me is, it's been 6 years since I've seen my daughter. I've been dating him, eventually marry him. And like a lot of people, when someone says that they can't see a child, I think, oh, you must have a bad lawyer. There must be some mistake at the court. And then I realized this was a systematic situation that dads in Argentina were facing. And I say dads because when I met him, the law said custody automatically went to the mother. Mm. And with him, we made a film that I directed called Erasing Dad. It created a big stir in Argentina, and it actually changed the laws to allow for joint custody and remove gender bias in the law. So no longer were moms automatically given custody over dads. And I decided at some point to leave Argentina after the film was done. And I moved back to the States. I'm like, I want to do a follow-up film. And I discovered two things that were very different from Argentina. One, the amount of moms who couldn't see their kids. So to this day, about half of the parents I work with, half of my followers or more are women. And the other thing that I began to discover was that social media, this was 2015, became a thing, and I could actually talk to kids. When I made the film, I mean, it's like, how could you reach out to a kid? But now kids have Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok now, and they're making videos about how they can't see a sibling, how they can't see a parent. So Erasing Family is a very different film. It's very psychological, and it's about healing. Mm-hmm. And the whole story of the film is, it goes into, it is an expose of the court system, but the main message is that when families are in conflict, when divorce gets worse over time and not better, because divorce is always bad, right? That's why you're getting divorced. But if over time the fighting gets worse, what is going on is people are repeating their trauma patterns. This is what I found from up to 7 generations back. And that's why they don't behave rationally. That's why they often, people say, I offered them more money, but they didn't take it. They might, face court sanctions for not letting the other parent see their child. And often these children were victims of high conflict parents or narcissistic parents. And that's why they're repeating this behavior over and over again, even though it's not rational. So the message of the film is we need to stop assigning blame and start helping these families. And what I learned from the film, first of all, is that a lot of these situations aren't as black and white as perhaps the parents who are suffering want to say, because there's a lot of, I did nothing wrong. And I think by saying I did nothing wrong, we're actually just blaming the other person, and we need to get out of the blame game and see how can we learn new ways to communicate, learn emotional regulation so our kids are able to break this cycle. Because if not, what research shows is that children in alienated homes where they suffer from parental alienation, which for the people watching who aren't familiar with the term, it's kind of a pop psychology term. It's not a legal term. It's not a diagnostic term, but it's simply when a parent or possibly a step parent makes it hard or impossible for a child to see and have a loving relationship with the other parent. And that could be through court orders, it could be through brainwashing the child, or it could just be saying, if you see the other parent, I'll punish you, or even more subtle is like, oh, when you leave mommy feels so alone. Do you really feel safe with dad? It's okay if you don't feel safe. You know, you don't have to go there, right? Like, you can just stay with mommy. We'll have lots of fun and it's okay. Like, so that sort of behavior, which children find it very difficult to resist. And what the research shows is children who grow up in this situation, they have a 50% chance, if they get married, of becoming a parent who alienates or a victim of parental alienation. And I've also interviewed and worked with parents who will say that they're on their third marriage and all three of their ex-spouses have alienated them.
Wow.
So,
wow. Well, I want to ask you more about the film, but I'm curious, before I go back and ask you about the film, I wanted to ask you how does it actually affect children, and the alienated parent and also the entire family?
Sure. So I would say the biggest consequence for children is being disconnected from their identity, because most alienated children lose contact with one side of their family. So they lose their cultural heritage. They might lose their name if a parent decides to change their name. They lose that connection. They lose that sense of self. They're taught to hate half of them. And this is the biggest consequence I see, because then children react very differently. I myself was valedictorian. I went to an Ivy League school. My grades never suffered. I never got into trouble, but I started to use drugs and drink alcohol and, look for love in all the wrong places at 14. So you might have a child who is very highly functioning, but really broken on the inside. You might also have children who, are failing at school. So I think that's very different, and we can categorize that alienated children will behave in a certain way. What we definitely do see is they have a lot of issues forming relationships, especially romantic relationships. And, they're learning that it's okay to walk away from conflict, to erase another person. They often have a lot of issues dealing with authority or bosses. So for me, before I started to do this work and really realize what was going on, I fought a lot with a lot of people, which didn't cause problems because, that made me an awesome debater. So people can turn these things, into possible useful skills. Children might become empaths. They might be very sensitive to other people's feelings because they always had to learn how to gauge a parent who was, could go off at any minute. But I would definitely say we see a repetition of these patterns and behavior, and a big failure in personal relationships, building healthy marriages and families, more so than kids who are alienated do drugs. I wouldn't say that. I would say it's in their personal relationships where we see a lot of suffering.
Yeah. Wow. And you mentioning that that the generational trauma goes back like 7 years. So how do those cycles like of generational trauma repeat?
Right. So they go back. So the cycle of generational trauma can go back 7 generations. And what we see often is when I ask the parents who I work with, it does happen, but it's rare for a parent to say this did not happen in my family. So there'll often be emotional cutoffs between them and their parents, or their parent and a brother, their parent and a cousin. You'll see this repeated. And then usually the person who is alienated comes from a family where there was also alienation of some sort. So to give a very basic example, I worked with one man who we actually prevented the alienation from happening. He contacted me early on, but he said, when my youngest child turned 5, my wife filed for divorce, but things weren't that bad. What happened to his wife, or now ex-wife, at 5? Her father left. So she had to almost unconsciously, subconsciously repeat these patterns, because if she were to not remove the father, then she would have to admit that her mother did something wrong. Now, as children, we cannot admit that mommy or daddy is doing something wrong, because that actually makes us feel very unsafe as kids. So we have to create whatever story possible, which is dad should go away. They're no good at age 5. That's all the kid needs. And then we're good from here on out. And these stories vary, but, you know, he would often say it's very irrational. She's not responding rationally. And this is because it's irrational behavior. So I tell parents that if the parent who's keeping them from seeing their children responds to money, they're very lucky, or just wants revenge or is angry, they're very lucky, because these actually, we can work with that. But when someone doesn't respond to anything and has to do this, this is when a lot of help is needed to prevent this from becoming a very tragic situation for everybody in the family.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, that's an incredible example. So there is an example, going back to your film, there's an example in your film of a narcissistic parent. And can you tell us about that part of your film?
Sure. In my film Erasing Family, so as a rule as a filmmaker, I never put anything that can't be verified in my film, and all my films are also legally checked. So I was working with the mom who couldn't see her 2 kids. She did reunite with one of her children. This is in the film. We show them reuniting. But at one point she goes, the stepmom actually sent back photos of me that she cut out of the family photos. And I said, do you have proof of this? And she goes, I can't really find it. And I said, well, I can't put this in the film unless you either give me proof or she admits to it on camera. Now, I got the chance to interview the stepmother. And I asked the stepmother, you know, I'm like, you know, sometimes divorces are really hard, and people, you know, might cut up photos, you know, remove the parent from photos. And she goes, oh yeah, I did that because we were making a photo collage and I cut the mom out of all the photos. And I thought, well, this would be a shame to throw them away. So I sent them back to her. And then we did find the photos. So she admitted to this, and in her mind, she was preserving her photos, not realizing that getting 20 photos of you cut out of the family photos could be incredibly hurtful.
Yeah.
But what I think is the takeaway for the people listening to this is on YouTube, where you can watch the film for free, Erasing Family, a lot of people leave a comment, how could the son not see this, and why did he choose to stay with the narcissistic stepmom when his mom is so full of love and is so kind? And at one point, he even chooses at 18 to be adopted by the stepmom, which is just kind of like a knife in the heart, because adopting an 18-year-old has no legal, no legal use really. And the stepmom shows the birth certificate and says, look, I'm on your birth certificate. It's like your mom never happened. Ha ha, it's all erased. And I think that's the moment when it actually sinks in to the son, the meaning behind this. Because I think she was just like, oh, you want to be adopted? Yeah, sure. Having spent time with both the mother and the stepmom, the mother was heartbroken and destroyed by this. The stepmom was high energy, happy. And this is what we need to understand when we're combating narcissistic abuse from anyone. One of their goals is to see you destroyed, but also if you're in a situation of alienation, your suffering does not bring your child back. So you need to work on your own strength so you become a magnet that attracts your child back. Also, they know that if they leave the step parent or the parent, that you can protect them. If you are destroyed and so weak that you cannot offer them protection, why would they come back to you?
Mm-hmm.
So the big takeaway from that scene is this is heartbreaking, maddening sadness to be alienated. It's like mourning the death of a child that's alive. But if you let it break you, your children will not want to be around you. You cannot become a martyr for them. You need to become as happy as you can be for them, which is the biggest challenge parents face because they are destroyed by this. But if you allow yourself to be destroyed, children don't want that. Children want a strong parent, not someone who brings their problems to you or says, let's talk about what's happening. Why don't you want to see me? I want to know, open up to me. Most kids don't want to do this, especially teenage boys.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say that was part of the reason why he ended up choosing the stepmother over his
Totally.
mother?
You would say every time she'd come, one, there was a fight with the stepmom. So easier if she doesn't come. Second, he would go see her and she would just want to talk about what was going on and why he didn't want to see her. So now this is part of the big plan of, of the alienator, but she kind of fell into that trap.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So much to think about. You're sharing so much valuable information. So what do you do to reunite families?
Right. So when Erasing Family came out, it was during the pandemic, and I was doing so much online. So as I was making the film, I would go on Facebook Lives. I would share what I was learning with parents, from professionals, from my stories, giving tips, so people would be excited about the film. And then after the film, a lot of parents reached out to me, asking me for help. And at first I said, no thanks, I'm a filmmaker, I don't do this. And some parents just really insisted, and I was like, fine, I'll coach you. And then with no advertising, I got 4 parents working with me in about a month. And then that grew and grew and grew until I decided to put filmmaking aside and work with parents full-time as a coach. And what I have found is, first of all, my approach is unique in a few ways. It's very child-focused. I always say my real client's the child. We really tap into what the child needs. But more than that, there's a lot of stuff that's written about parental alienation it's just super depressing. It focuses on all the harm. And this is a big problem. And most parents don't reunite, but I'm like, okay, if we look at this as we would look at it as a business, if you want to earn $1 million, you should surround yourself with millionaires, right? You should study successful businesses and copy them. So then in my film, so not only in the film did I interview a lot of families and show them reuniting and some who didn't reunite, but to get to those families, I had to talk to like thousands of families. And I began to see patterns. I was like, well, why don't we just copy what works? So I don't focus on explaining how alienation works. I don't focus on how awful it is. I focus on what can we do. And the first step for parents is emotional healing. So what a lot of parents want to say is, how do I reach my kid?
Yeah.
And I understand that desperation, but one, you don't know if you outreach to your child or send a text if they'll respond right away. Are you ready for that response? Are you ready if it's an angry response? Number one. You have to do the emotional work first. You have to let go of the anger. You have to accept, you have to see what your role is, not to blame yourself, but to learn from it. Why are you attracted to this type of person? Do you thrive on conflict? Are you repeating your own patterns? I've worked with parents who will then say, well, I don't talk to my own mom. I'm like, why not? She's abusive. I'm like, what do you think your daughter says about you? You got to talk to your mom. I don't want to. Your daughter probably says the same thing, right? Now, we can put limits and boundaries, and that's too much to go in on this interview about how we actually can talk to that. But if we erase people in our own lives, then we're teaching our child to erase. I also teach parents, you cannot expect a child to do more than 10% of the effort you put in. So many kids say, why don't they just pick up the phone? Well, will you pick up the phone? No, I'm scared of rejection. So the parent has to do a lot of work. Then we apply strategy. In the past month, I reunited 3 parents that I know of, because sometimes also I'll see on Facebook they reunite, like, hey, you're reunited. And they're like, oh yeah. And like, thanks for telling me. So now I encourage parents to tell me when they reunite more. And I've been doing a better job keeping in touch. Because I have found people where I'm like, is that your daughter in the photo who didn't talk to you for 5 years? Like, oh yeah, I just taught her how to drive. And then I'll be like, okay, we should celebrate this, right?
Wow.
So with the 3 who reunited in February, one was 14 years, no contact, one 5 years, no contact, one 1 year, no contact. In these 3 cases, the child reached out to the parent.
Wow.
There is an energetic bond that cannot be cut. And when you heal, either they will feel it somehow, life miraculously will arrange a meeting, or when you reach out, they'll respond differently. And I tell the parents, are there better ways to text and reach out than others? Of course. But if I write your text for you and you aren't emotionally healed, they won't work. I also work with a dad who reunited with his daughter, who was 7. He had no court order to see, and 2, which I found out after I started working with him. He was like, oh, I also have 2 other sons I'm also alienated from, and with his 2 adult sons after 1 session.
Wow.
Because in 1 session, he was like, I'm willing to try. I'm not going to blame the courts. I'm not going to blame my exes. I'm just going to be there and show up with love. And for some people, it's very instantaneous as realization. Some people, it really is a process to let go and just accept. And he showed me the text he wrote. I'm like, honestly, I would have told you not to text right now. We should work some more. Honestly, I don't think these are great texts, but they work because they were genuine with no expectation. And there isn't this genuine, thought, feeling behind it. It can be much more difficult. So for all the parents listening who have a difficult relationship with their child, 1, the sooner you start working on this, the better. It's easier to reverse parental alienation after a few months or a year than 10 or 20 years. I don't want to say impossible, but there's a lot more you can do. But also that you really need to show up with unconditional love. And it's common for parents to be angry at their children. It's common for them not to know how to respond because that child has been through a lot of trauma. So they're going to show up with a trauma response. So are you as a parent ready to contain that child who shows up with a trauma response?
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So much. And clearly, your method and your work with other families have been successful. So I'm just so happy to hear about all of these families that have been reunited, and parents learning how to get out of their patterns so that they can have those relationships that they want with their children, whether they're still children or they're adult children.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is not to lose hope. And a lot of what I do with parents is like, you're focusing on the door that isn't open. Like I send a text message and I'm blocked. There might be 1,000 doors we can open. There might just be 1, but let's focus on what we can open. I recently worked with a mom who she said, I can't get a message to my children. I said, well, let's find a third party who can. She goes, I don't know anybody. And I tell all my parents, write down 100 names of everybody who knows you and the kids. And they say 100. But then it ended up, she was like, oh, I'm still in contact with her elementary school teacher. I know where they work. All these things that she was blocked to when she did the exercise, all of a sudden there were a dozen people willing to help her. She hadn't realized for 15 years when she'd been alienated.
Wow.
So we need to focus, but now and from the work you do, if you're a victim of narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, etc., you're in a trauma response. When you're in a trauma response, you can't think logically.
Right.
That's why the emotional healing, emotional regulation, and letting go of the anger and the pain and the sadness is so important, because you can't do a worksheet like that if you cry every time you write down the names.
Right.
So there's a step-by-step process, and the duration of each step is so different for each parent. But I haven't met one parent who reunited who did not emotionally heal first.
Yeah, it's so important. And those parents who do choose to do that work are leading by example, and they're breaking that generational trauma cycle.
That's so true, Pi. They are breaking that generational cycle of trauma. They're mirroring to their kids how to deal with abuse, which their kids have also been victims to, and they're taking the steps to protect and parent their children, not waiting for their children to reach out or parent themselves.
Yeah, so important. Oh my goodness. Ginger, this has been an amazing conversation. And so I want to encourage our viewers to check out Ginger's film. And we're gonna well, you have several films, but the one
Just the Racing Family, start there. That's
yeah.
because I want to warn parents, sometimes they get very nervous about watching it. This film has happy endings. It is about people reuniting. It's also for teenagers and young adult children. It's very helpful because it has a healing message. So there's some sad, poignant parts, but it's not a sad film.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to provide a link so that people can watch the film. Click on that link and watch the film. I want to encourage people to do so. And you also have another gift that you want to offer our viewers today. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I'm going to gift everybody a short video lesson on the 6 steps you have to follow to reunite and the most common mistakes alienated parents make. It's super short. It will inspire you with some amazing stories on how you can use these steps in your own life. And I love keeping things short and keeping things simple. You have enough going on in your life. You don't have to become an expert in some complex psychological issue. You just need to know what works and will work for your family and tailor it for you.
Oh my goodness. Ginger, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and this valuable gift with us. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Pi, for all the work that you do to help people who are victims of narcissistic parental abuse. And for all of the people out there watching, as you know, Pi, this gets better. If you put in the work, there is light at the end of the tunnel. How you're feeling now is not how you're feeling forever.
Yeah. The work is worth it, and you're worth it. Your family is worth it. Your community is worth it. The world is worth it, because when we heal ourselves, it has the ripple effect.
Very true.
Yeah. Oh, thanks again, Ginger. And I want to thank everybody else who's here today joining us for Trusting After Trauma Season 6. We hope that you enjoy this journey with our experts on how we can recover from parental narcissistic abuse and heal our body, mind, and spirit to live joyful, authentic lives.